Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's Mondays with Madison. I am so excited for this week's interview with Lindsay Rhodes, who has spent over a dozen years reporting for the NFL Network and now has her own podcast called the NFL Rhodes Show. We have a great interview coming up talking about her career as a sportscaster, so make sure you keep watching. All right, Lindsay, so let's get started. So before we start, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, Madison, I have worked in sports broadcasting since I was about, a few years younger than you are now, I guess. But yeah, so it's been a little while without giving away, specifically how old I am, I guess.
Don't need to.
Like 2 decades, we'll say. So, yeah, I've worked in sports broadcasting, focusing on the NFL for the last 13 or so years. And prior to that, just about every sport you could imagine and every role you could imagine. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about where you are in your career and
me too.
Offer you whatever advice that I possibly can.
Yes, I will be picking your brain for sure. So growing up in California, you were the sports editor for your school's yearbook and got into journalism at quite an early age. So how did you know this was something you wanted to pursue at so early on in your high school years?
That's a good question because I didn't actually play sports growing up, which is crazy to think that like my career is in the sports world. I kind of did like back then it was there, like some girls played sports. It wasn't like it is now where like every girl goes into a sport, right?
Yeah, you and so up at age of 5.
Totally. So I did like, I was in like dance and I did like theater and some like after school Girl Scouts, all these after school activities like that. And my brother played baseball and basketball and like all these different sports. And my dad always coached his youth teams. So we always ended up going to the practices and going to the games. And so I spent a lot of time at his after school activity too. And kind of got to a point where like, I realized like, I kind of like his after school activity better than I like mine. But then I was old enough that I felt like I couldn't just jump into playing any of these sports because there were other girls who had played them for like years. And I was like, I'm not going to jump onto the freshman team and play for the very first time and be the person that sucks. I'm too competitive to do that. So I went into like the sports yearbook and like, okay, I will take like a journalism route to this. I will be involved in this world in a different way. And so, and I kind of knew a little bit about the sports and stuff, even though I didn't play it because of my dad and my brother. These were like what our dinner table conversations consisted of. And so I did that and was really into that and kind of found that like, there were conversations I'd have with like guys in my math homeroom class, right? Where like we'd be sitting there with like the sports pages and there was like a little huddle of us that would check like the Angels box score and stuff. And I really liked the feeling of like me chiming in and knowing things and them being like, what?
All impressed.
Like, okay. Yes, I do know that. And don't look surprised, you know? So I learned that about myself, that I like the dynamic of doing something that people don't think that I can do. And at the time, there were very few women that were doing sports broadcasting. Like there were women that were doing it, so that I knew it was a viable career path for me, but it was like every network had like one, right? And so I went, that kind of was a natural transition. My, sports yearbook and all that kind of stuff. I was like, well, maybe I'll do sports journalism and then sports broadcasting. Cause I had a theater background from like, I played Pinocchio in like the 3rd grade play. Okay. So I was like, I can perform. So
the audience.
Right. So there was a part of me that felt like the like sports broadcasting was a natural mesh of the two.
Totally.
And it felt like a career path where like, I could have some control over it to a degree because it was how hard I worked and, being smart and working hard were things that could pay off in this type of career path. So so I went to USC. They had a sports broadcasting major. No, they didn't. I'm sorry. They had a broadcast journalism major as opposed to like a communications major, which some other schools did, UCLA. And that felt too broad for me. So yeah, right. So I went to USC to major in broadcast journalism and wanted to go there too, because they had like a big athletic program and it felt like there would be a lot of sports media around and opportunities to be involved in some way in the various teams and to cover them like that. And I got an internship right away. And yeah, there was a point my freshman year where I was like, I don't know if I want to be Hannah Storm or Diane Sawyer, like if I want to cover like the White House or if I want to go sports. And I took a poli-sci class and I was like, okay, it's sports it is. Sports it is. This one's tough. Let's talk football instead.
Let's go with the football route.
Yep.
But like you said, at USC, you had internships and got involved in the athletic department as well as Fox Sports Network. So what did those internships in college, those experiences then teach you that you have now applied in your career?
So those were so valuable. And I know that there have been conversations, especially in the last couple of years, that are really valuable and important conversations to have surrounding the internship thing, right? And like whether you should work for free or not, and whether or not it's an unfair system, because people who can afford to work for free then get a leg up over people who can't afford to work for free. I think it's all valuable, right? The one thing that I would say that I found valuable in those experiences is just the opportunity to be around people who were doing the thing you want to do and just soak it all up. And so my suggestion is, as much as you can afford to do it, and as much as like they can kind of readjust the system so that it's fair, so that, you know, everyone's kind of in the same spot, to the thing that was valuable about those experiences was to just be in the presence of, you know? And so people who were on air, I was in the presence of. I got a chance to see how they approached it, what they did that I liked, what they did that I, you know, maybe I was like, that's not something that I would do, or that person has a different style than would be mine. So you kind of figure out like who you are, what you like, what you don't like, and then just what the job actually is, which is an important thing to know. And then another thing that I thought was really important and really shaped who I am as a broadcaster was being in the truck, being around producers, being around the people who are cutting the tapes for the broadcast that are sitting in an edit bay all day long, just to cut clips of like roll-ins, B-roll, that kind of stuff, to be around the director, to see how the truck operates. Because fast forward, 20 years, one of the things that I am constantly thinking is what I need to do to make their job easier. Like I understand where they're coming from, because I sat in that position where I wasn't just on air. I was just observing all of their different jobs. And I understand why a producer needs things done a certain way. And I understand why the director needs certain things done a certain way. So you understand kind of how the show fits together and not just your role in it, because it really is, it's this puzzle, which is the thing I love the most about it, is every show you put together, it's like you're putting together a puzzle, and some of the puzzles, are like cooler than others. You do it faster, whatever.
Yes.
I like the challenge of it. And you have to understand that you're just one part of the puzzle. So you have to kind of roll with like where they tell you to go. There are reasons for different things. And so
exactly.
I think that was a very valuable experience for me to understand all like how the whole process comes together.
Yeah, this past weekend, I actually got to be a runner for Fox Sports at the NASCAR event at Circuit of the Americas, which is like the new racetrack right here in Austin. And just being behind the scenes and seeing, I was the support staff, very basic role, but just being able, like you said, to be in the trucks and around all these people who were audio, visual, shot the drone shots, like everything else. There's so many pieces that go into it, and it really makes you appreciate the whole production of it. And it's so crazy how many pieces there are to that puzzle, like you said. It was really cool.
And it's also, I've noticed being in a position to be on the other side and have people who are either interns or production assistants or like runners, those types of people. And it's funny how you can tell who is going to make it and who isn't going to do the things that are necessary in this particular industry, because it's really competitive and it's really hard. You have to carve out your niche, and you have to be willing to do a lot of things where you don't make a lot of money and there isn't a lot of like glory associated with it. You have to be like, it looks like this sexy career path, right? Like this, the person's on TV and everyone knows who they are. There are so many steps before you get to that point where you're just grinding and you're just working your ass off. And like, you know, and you might be making a fool out of yourself, and you have to become okay with the fact that like, that was a bad show. I looked like an idiot. I asked an awful question or whatever. And you have to kind of, like an athlete, you have to be like, forget that play, on to the next play. And learn so I think, sort of but so you can tell who's willing to do the things, you know? And if I say like, hey, I know this job sucks, this is something I just sort of need somebody to do. Like, could you go scroll through tweets, right? Like, and find me a tweet that is sort of like this, you know, I need something that tells a story or that helps me tell the story. It's not just, like a tweet that an athlete tweets out that's like cheers on somebody. There has to be like a thought that is a different thought. Like, can you go find that? You know, it feels like a thankless thing to just go scrolling through and find, but the person who takes the note of what you're looking for, and then will just go do all this busy work and then come back to you with this one small thing. You're like, okay, like you can tell who's willing to do it and who's like, oh, this is such a dumb job. And then they don't do it well. That person, there's a reason that, there's not a reason. It's not like a test, you know, but if you can't do that with like, I want to do this the best that I possibly can. Yes. Because those things are necessary, the entry-level positions of this career. You have to do, it's like an inverted pyramid. Sports broadcasting is the hardest jobs, the most that you will ever have to take on your plate in terms of doing all of the different things, you know, shooting video, editing, being the on-camera person without a camera operator, like set up a shot, walk it down, go stand in front of it, do your stand-up, go back, edit it, you know, all of it, that all happens. That's like your first job. And then you move up and they take away one of the jobs, you know, now you're not running your own camera maybe. Okay. But you're still editing your stuff when you get back. Okay. Then you go to a next thing. And then like by the end, you're just, you know, in my case, by the end, you're just on camera. You have the least responsibility, but also it's just a different type of responsibility. You better be really good at this one thing that you do, but you don't have to do all the work. So it's kind of funny that like, you better be ready to work the second you jump into this business, because that's exactly when you're going to be doing the most work of your entire life is like right out of the gate. Right. And that's what pays off for sure. So like you said, entry level, you took jobs in Washington and Santa Barbara before you found yourself back in Los Angeles for Fox Sports Network, mainly covering high school games at first, I believe, and USC games, while also covering, like you said, a multitude of other sports like Lakers, Angels, Dodgers, even the Bruins. But of all the teams, and at this point in your career, do you have a favorite memory or highlight that you got to witness firsthand and even report on? There were so many early on. I think covering USC during like the Pete Carroll years, you know, with Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush, when they were like the team, that was particularly memorable. It was just a fun time. It was a fun program to be around. You felt like you were really dropped in the middle of something special. And I think everybody around it knew we were watching something that was really special. And so I remember being at the Texas game. I just realized who I'm talking to. Oh, stop it with your hook 'em horns. Hey, I was crying probably that night. Exactly. I was rooting for the Trojans that night. We won't talk about it, but I was. Well, that night, I remember the way that specific team had developed. It was like every time you think they're going to lose, they wouldn't lose. Like the whole like Bush push at Notre Dame. And so there all these plays were like, they would just find a way. And so I remember standing on the sideline, just completely convinced that they were going to find a way to win. Like, so, Vince scores, but then like SC gets the ball back. And I'm saying we now, because I'm kind of like, there's been some distance. At the time, I was very like, I am a journalist and I am unbiased and I'm not rooting. And it actually was easier. We could talk about that. It was easier to do than I think people think.
Yeah.
But I remember standing on the sideline, ready to run out on the field because I'm going to get the one-on-one interviews for our post-game show for Fox Sports West after the game. And I have to just be ready to run out there the second the game is over and grab somebody and start asking them questions. And so in that role, you're kind of on the sideline thinking like, okay, who am I going to grab? Okay, I'm going to grab Lindell White. What would I ask Lindell White? Here are like three, you know what I mean? Like, you're just sort of like, do I have questions for that person? At that point, I'd covered the team for so long that I just knew the guys so well that there are specific things that you don't have to sit there and think, because you know them so well that you could grab them and you can literally just have a conversation about what they did in that game. And it's easier than, if you're just dropping into a team.
Right.
But I was still in my head, like sort of like thinking winning questions, because even though they're down and there's just seconds left, I'm like, they will pull it out. They always pull it out. This is what always happens. I'm always preparing for a loss and then it's a win. And it just didn't enter my, like, I just
thought process. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the game's over and they lost. And I'm like, holy, what is happening? And all of a sudden these guys that I felt so bad for them because I knew that if they had won that game, the difference in winning that one game and not winning was going down as like the best college football team of all time.
Yeah.
And one of, like they don't win the championship. Like you're not really in that conversation,
right?
Though we can still talk about them. Like it was crazy how good they were that year. Right. So I knew how much it meant historically. And so you're sitting there and you're like, gonna grab, like a Matt Leinart in the locker room. And I'm like, it's devastating to them. Like they didn't just lose a game. Like this is their
legacy,
And so, I remember feeling really bad for them and, just like the person to person empathy, and trying to do it and run out on the field and grab somebody who is shell shocked because they too expected like we're going to find a way.
Right. We're going to
and then have to have a conversation that's like,
well,
so
right.
That didn't go the way we thought, like, and try to be professional and do all of those things. And so that was a very memorable experience. But there were tons, I loved doing the high school games, even at a point when I was doing like Angels pre and post and Lakers sideline and all these different things. I really loved doing the high school because when we went to the high school, like we built something here in Southern California there where there wasn't really like a game of the week. And we got to a point, it felt like this was like our class project, everyone who worked on it. It was like, we're in this together. We're building this. So we work on these higher profile things, but this one's fun. Right. And every time we go to a high school game on a Friday night, we'd be at like Mater Day and they would treat us like we were college game day. Like it was a big deal for them that we were there. So the coaches were like excited and the players were excited and the fans in the stands were like, this is the big game this year. And it was just so fun to be a part of that. And then again, fast forward, 15 years later, I had people coming up to me at NFL Network. I'd be like sitting on set, typing, ready. And then like one of our, guests who plays in the NFL would come by. Sometimes I didn't even remember the fact that I'd covered them in high school. And they'd be like, Miss Rhodes, I just wanted to tell you that I used to watch you did like one of our games. And I was like, what is this? Like you're in the NFL. Like you don't
talk to me like that.
Totally. But because you're doing it at this formative stage for them where that's like the thing, you know, like they always remember those games. And so it was really fun to be a part of that.
Totally. Speaking of coming full circle moments, I met you when you were working with my dad on Trojans Live for pre and post game coverage of USC football games. And I actually have a picture of us. I'll crop it in right here.
I love it. Little Maddie in her cheerleading uniform.
My cheerleading outfit. See, I was rooting for the Trojans at one point.
As you should have been.
I know, seriously. But you were always an inspiration to me, especially being a woman in this field, and just seeing you up there was always such a big deal for me as a little girl. So there are way more women reporting now, like we talked about, and how when you were getting into it, there was about one woman at every station. So who was that role model for you growing up and getting into that career?
Hannah Storm. So Hannah Storm was the one that, and there were others, I'm sure, but like I locked in on Hannah Storm, right? Hannah Storm was doing like the NBA on NBC, and she was at the desk. Like, so the person that was the studio host for, you know, pre, halftime, post, all that kind of stuff on NBC, which it was like where the NBA was, right? Was a female. And I just remember her being like I said earlier, I liked that whole, like, I can do something you can't do, you don't think I can do, right?
Totally.
So she was like the epitome of that for me. Like, she was sitting up there at the desk, controlling the conversation. She wasn't there because there was no tokenism. It didn't sense, you know, I didn't feel like that. She wasn't there because she was beautiful. She was beautiful, but that obviously was not why she was there. She was there because she was good and she knew what she was talking about. And everyone who interacted with her treated her like she knew what she was talking about. Like, and
not like an extra.
Yes. That appealed to me greatly. That like credibility and authority and kind of badassness, like that is specifically what appealed to me. And I think that having her to look at, and then also being able to, I don't know if I could have articulated it at the time, though maybe I could have, but I know now, knowing in my gut, that's what I liked about her, is what was really helpful for me in terms of carving my own career path, because it helped me make intentional decisions, right? Like, I knew that's the career I wanted. I didn't just want to be on TV. I didn't just want to be in any kind of role, right? I wanted ultimately to sit at a desk and control the conversation and have people talk to me like I knew what I was talking about. And so every decision that I made, whether consciously or not consciously, was to seek out credibility and authority. So I remember when I was covering USC, going to practices. And, you know, for television, you don't sometimes have to go to the whole practice, right? Like, you can show up at the end when the availability starts, put your microphone and camera in front of the various people's faces, get your sound bites, and then leave, you know, and then just go put that on TV. And it's such a small, the amount of content that you need is so small and compact. And usually all you're really looking for is a soundbite about like the team that you're playing that week and the challenges ahead. Like, it's pretty simplified. Like, let's tell a story about what Saturday is going to look like. But the beat writers were there the whole practice, and they watched everything, and they're watching all of the different periods, and they're taking in all these little notes, like this, you know, second string linebacker is playing well this week. Like, and I watched when the other sports broadcasters, the TV people, would come in, the gate would open, they'd come in at the end and they just stick their either the microphone in people's faces. And I watched the beat writers kind of go like, you know, like I could tell they didn't take them as seriously. And so just reading that, I was like, No, I'm looking for credibility, and I'm going to earn it from them. I'm going to earn it from the players. I'm going to earn it like, so you think like I have to do these little things, the little things that earn that. I'm going to come at the beginning of practice. I'm going to watch the whole entire thing. I'm going to stand right there with them. I'm going to be the TV person that does that. Right. And so whether I need it for my broadcast or not, what I need it for is for them all to know that I am here doing this job, ready to work. And that I see myself as a journalist, not a TV star, you know? So, and that's not to say that what the other TV people were doing was wrong. That's just like different priorities. You know what I mean? Like maybe they were like, I want to be fun on TV. I want to be funny. I want to like bring various different skill sets. Like that's their priority. My priority was like, I need you to know I know what I'm talking about. And so I have to do the little things to earn that respect.
Yeah.
So
completely.
I think the intentionality of understanding what I wanted to be and why I wanted to be that, again, it makes it so that you're like, you know, you get a job offer and you're like, no, I don't really need to be in a bikini on a beach doing volleyball. You know what I mean? Like that won't help me get to a point where I'm sitting at a desk, you know? So you
prioritizing those steps.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you found yourself sitting at a desk on NFL Network, appearing as one of the main anchors on NFL Total Access, and also being on NFL Network Now, NFL Game Day Morning, and then you got to be on Fantasy Zone recently. So has there been anyone in your career, whether that's been coach or player, that you have been starstruck by in your time on reporting them?
That's a good question. The answer is 100% yes. Less so more recently. And my memory is awful. Okay. So these are questions that I get all the time. Like, who's your favorite person you've ever interviewed? And I'm like, I need to sit down one day and I need to literally just find an answer to these things. Right. The person that I think I kind of like worked myself into knots over more than anyone else was Peyton Manning. And I didn't have a chance to interview him very frequently. I think I interviewed him like 2 or 3 times. And it was usually because he was pitching something, like he was promoting DirecTV Sunday Ticket or something like that. So he would come on Total Access to promote DirecTV Sunday Ticket. But then what happens when they're promoting is you ask one question about the thing they're promoting, but then you get the rest of the interview, you know, to go wherever you want to go. Well, Peyton was my favorite player. Like I loved, probably for the reasons that you could pick up on, like that I've talked about. I loved that he was so smart in the huddle. Like it felt like like a controllable asset. Like whether he had, I mean, obviously the physical tools were there, but like what made Peyton was that he was so freaking smart and that he like worked so hard. Like it felt associated with hard work, which I felt like was relatable to someone like me. So I loved him. He was my favorite. And then he would do SNL and he was so freaking funny. And so I was like, not only am I going to get to talk to Peyton Manning, I'm going to have a moment and he's going to be funny. He's going to be funny with me. Like I want funny Peyton Manning. I want us to have like a repartee.
Banter.
Yes. So I had like these questions in mind, you know, where I was like, lob, like I could see where this is going to go. He's going to be funny. And he was not funny that day. Like he was like, you know, like just like serious Peyton, like I'm here to do an interview. I don't know what you're doing. And it was like, it was so crushing to me. I was like, it did not, like, it was fine. Right. It was a fine interview, but it didn't have that moment. Like what you're always looking for in TV is like a moment where it either is just a really good back and forth, like we're vibing and I brought out a part of your personality that isn't normally seen by people, or, good information, whatever it is. Yeah. I was like, I just want that thing. Like, give me the thing, Peyton. And he was like very, very buttoned up, giving all of the predictable answers, you know, the things that you're straightforward, so hard to avoid. And I remember leaving it and just being like, I failed with my guy. And he doesn't even know that he's my guy. I wonder if he knew that he was my guy, would he have given me more? You know, like I've told him before. But like the whole thing where you're just like, I'm nervous because I love you so much.
Totally.
You know? Yeah.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, you now have your own podcast called the NFL Rhodes Show, and you have guest speakers that come on, and you really dive deep into the analysis of the NFL with stats and breaking news debriefing and all of that. It's fantastic. I am a big fan. But what sparked the Rhodes Show, and where do you see it going in the future?
So I think what I wanted to do with the podcast is, so there are like a lot of different avenues, especially lately in media. Media is just changing.
So many.
The landscape is just changing. But working in television for so long, you know, television has a very specific flow to it. It has a pace and a timing. And a lot of what sports television is timing. And you have to prepare almost everything aside from, like, you know, inside the NBA or whatever on TNT. Like, part of the brilliance there is that it just is so free flowing, and you can tell that it's off the cuff. But mostly sports television, the thing is that it's a visual medium. So the producers have to know kind of where you're going to go and when you're going to go there, so that they can then have B-roll ready that matches what you're going to talk about. And so everything is sort of, it's not scripted, but it's planned. Like, you sort of know where everything's going.
For everything.
For the most part. Yeah. And everything's timed. Like, okay, so this conversation is in for 1.5 minutes, and this conversation is in for 3. And so you kind of have a clock in your head the whole time. And, you know, I ask a question, this guy's going to talk for 30, 45 seconds. Then the other analyst is going to talk for 30, 45 seconds. And then if they go any longer, I have no time for a follow. I got to just I just have to ask the next question, and we're moving, you know? And sometimes the producer's in your ear going like, move, like, right. So the things that I really like I am weedy when it comes to sports. I like the deep dives. I want to sit there and I want to break things down. I want to ask you 10 follow-up questions that get to the core of like what it is that you're really like, what are you really trying to say? And so what I thought of when I, you know, wanted to start a podcast is that this is a great opportunity to do all the things I've never had a chance to do, like, and call on analysts and people who I haven't had a chance to work with, because you work for NFL Network, you use the people that are booked on the show and that you work with, and you think amazing people. But I'd be like, gosh, that like Louis Riddick at ESPN, I love his work. I'd love to talk to Louis Riddick about football. I would love to talk to, you know, name that person at PFF. Like, they're so smart. I want to bring them on. And this guy who wrote this article for The Athletic, it gives me an opportunity to be like, you wrote a really interesting article about positional value, you know, or whatever. Would you come on my podcast so we could talk about it for an hour? And I love that it gives me an outlet to have these football conversations that are super in the weeds. And clearly that's a niche audience, right? Like, it's not broad. Like, we're not going to appeal to everyone. They're going to be like, shut up and move, you know? But like, I think it's interesting. And I think that there are people who are like hardcore football fans that will find it interesting, because it's harder to find, you know? So that's what appeals to me about that. And that's what I kind of want the show to be. I want it to be like a smart football conversation for smarter football fans who really want to like understand what's going on and not just have a debate.
And really deepen their knowledge on other topics. They're very deep and cool, and I really like listening to them. So, did it pause? Okay.
It just froze for a sec. You're back.
Okay, we're back. So, last question before we dive into our person behind the sportscaster in this case. So, I want to ask you one more thing. What piece of advice do you have for someone like myself who's looking to follow in your footsteps in this industry?
So, I mean, I could talk for days about this subject matter, right? Like, there are so many layers to,
and we'll keep the conversation going later for sure.
But, yes, absolutely. But I think for me, it would boil down to 2 primary things. And one is to, as much as you possibly can, be intentional about this career, because it's so broad. Like, I want to be a sports broadcaster is broad, especially now that all of the digital avenues are opening up. I mean, you could create an audience for yourself on TikTok and on Instagram and on Twitter. And like, you can build a brand without a gatekeeper telling you no. So, but I think that the thing to keep in mind there, or even if you take the traditional path of like, I'm going to be a sports broadcaster, I'm going to go to a small market and then I'm going to go to a medium market and I'm going to do all this stuff, is to be intentional. Understand what it is that you bring to the table. What do you want to bring to the table? Who do you want to be within this larger, ecosystem? Do you have a favorite sport? Is that a priority? Do you want to be like a really like someone who is really associated with one specific thing? Do you have a niche? Are you niche? How do you say that? Anyway, like, are you somebody who went to like medical school and then decided that you wanted to, go into sports instead? Like, that's a specific area where you could carve out a lane for yourself. So as much as you can be intentional about what you're bringing to the table, and maybe it is that you want to be broad, maybe you love all of them. And so your intention is, I love it so much, I just want to be, I want to talk about all the things, and I want to make it fun, and I want to make it funny. And like, that's okay too. That's intentional. Just think about what you're trying to project as much as you possibly can, rather than just like jumping from thing to thing without any intentionality. And then number 2 is to prioritize experience over money in the beginning, right? Like experience, like everything, like the whole Malcolm Gladwell, I don't even remember what it is, 10,000 hours. I don't, but like, it takes a certain amount of time to become an expert at anything. And that just takes reps. And this as an athlete, you just got to practice. You got to do it. You're not going to be good right away. That's okay. Do it some more. Just keep doing it. And broadcasting is like that. If you are only like, I've seen people, and when I first came out, I wanted Fox Sports West to hire me because that's where I'd done an internship. I was like, just hire me and I'll stay here in Los Angeles and it'll be wonderful. I'll never have to move and go to a small market, and I can just work here for you. And thank God that didn't work out, because I was on the air in the very beginning before I had to move to a small market job. I was on the air like once every 3 weeks. I'd get to do like a package once every 3, you know what I mean? So
sprinkle here and there.
And then it doesn't go great, and you're like, oh, this is what I take away from that. This is what I learned. But then you'd have to wait 3 weeks to get back on the horse and do it again, because you're competing with people who have a lot more experience that are just better than you. So the best thing that I ever did was go to a small market where you're just thrown into the deep end and you got to do it all. And if you have an awful package, doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter as much, because you're going to go right back the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day.
Reps on reps.
And you get better so much faster. So as much as you can afford to, deprioritize money in the beginning and prioritize experience. What is going to make you better faster and put you in a position to be ready for the job that you want when it's offered to you? Because that's the other thing. You don't want that job before you're ready for it. Because, and I see this a lot too.
That's a great point.
Get big jobs before they're ready and think they're really lucky, but they're the lowest person on the totem pole, and people look at them that way. And you have to earn the opportunity to do more. You have to earn people's respect. And this is a business where people in charge, for the most part, do not know the difference between a lack of experience and a lack of potential. All they see is what they see.
Right.
So if you're putting something on tape and it's a really raw interview and you're kind of rough and you're not asking obvious follow-up questions and stuff like that, they're like, this person's no good. And I literally had someone tell me that like months out of college. I did a sideline job for a high school football game here in Southern California. It was my first live thing ever. And I was really rough, right?
Yeah, you're nervous. It's the first one.
I'm 21, 22, whatever it is. I'm first of all, no one in my broadcasting class in college is doing anything remotely close to this. So I'm like way above, like ahead of the game. But I was called into an office and told that I was not good, and that the producer said, my neighbor came over last night and was like, who was that girl on the show? She was awful. He told me this. And I'm like trying not to cry.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
like, I know I wasn't good compared to Chick Hearn and Vin Scully, who are your other broadcasters.
Right.
Like I'm 22, right?
Years on years. Yeah.
But I'm like, if you could see the people that I'm competing with in my sphere, like that are 22, like you wouldn't say something like that to me. And so he suggested that I become a producer, that might be a better career path for me. And I left and I cried. And then I got mad. And I was like,
I'm going to prove him wrong.
Like, absolutely. Like 100%. No, he's wrong. So, and I knew in my gut he was wrong. Even though I knew in my gut it also hadn't been good, you know? I was like, there is a difference. Why can't you see that there's a difference? Why aren't you looking for my potential as opposed to whether or not I am a finished product?
Right,
I've never done a live show before, ever. So that taught me I have to go get those reps. I have to go do it somewhere else where people know the difference, you know, where they're used to dealing with people who are straight out of college. So they know when I'm not the best, it's because I'm straight out of college, you know? So I think that's my other biggest piece of advice, is to value reps and experience over flashy or money or anything like that. Cause it's not what's best for you. What's best for you is experience.
I will definitely keep those noted for sure. And hopefully we'll get to talk about more later. So now we will dive into our person behind the sportscaster and find out what makes you, Lindsay Rhodes, camera. So I'll kind of keep this open-ended and you can take this where you want, but you can talk about your family or anything like that and kind of what makes you, you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, more lately, well, like for a long time, what makes me was like the whole, like I was very much a workaholic, right? Like and that's one of the things about this industry is you sort of feel like it's so competitive. You have to say yes to everything. You're like, I'm on the hamster wheel and I'm not getting off the hamster wheel. And like too much time off makes you feel like you're losing ground and all that kind of stuff. It's a very unhealthy like drive.
I can see how it gets into that cycle though, for sure.
Totally. So, I even had somebody ask me like within the last year, like, so what are your hobbies? And I was like, that's a cute question. My hobby is to go to work and then to have young children who need me to like get them snacks. Like, you know, like that's like, I play Barbies in my free time. Like that's not, I'm not afforded a hobby. Like I can't even remember the last time I had a hobby. So, but like more recently, I really like going to my son's baseball games and soccer games and kind of being like the youth parent and experiencing sports from that level, like just a totally different perspective,
the beginning set of eyes.
Yes. And I've found myself literally sitting there thinking like, this brings me joy. And there, again, because of the hobby question and stuff like that, there isn't a lot of stuff where I'm like, I'm able to isolate, like this thing makes me super happy, you know, like, but that does, because there's a lot of, when you have young kids, kind of monotony and things that you're doing because they need you to do it, but it's not because super enjoyable for you. Like you want them to be happy, but like, do you want to play Legos? Not so much.
Not really.
Sure I will.
Not on top of the list.
So we're at a point now where I have isolated, like I really like that. I like enjoying sports in that way. And it's funny, Madison, because I'm like I'm literally Googling like how to be a good sports parent because it's so hard. It's hard. And I've seen crazy sports parents. I don't think I'm even close to that, but like there's moments where you're like, you know, my son's 7 and he played in a baseball tournament this weekend and he played 3 games in one day. And by the 3rd game, he's 7. Like he was like, he's good. Like it's an all-star. It's an all-star team. So he's good at baseball. He loves baseball. By the 3rd game, these boys were like
looking at the cloud.
And like there's like a batter and they're like looking up at like whatever. I'm like, so I'm in the stands and I'm like, Jackson, focus, Jackson, focus. And he looked at me like, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. Right. Like, but there's like a fine line between like if you're going to do it, you have to do it. Like, you have to pay attention. Like, you can't be that jackass in the field who's ruining it for your teammates. Like, but there's also a part where I'm trying to, figure out like how much of this is because I don't want him to look that way and how much of it is because it matters to him and I want him to be good. So it's hard.
It is hard. Watching my brother too. I even, as an older sibling, I think it's almost 9 years apart. So I'm a good chunk older than him. And so even going to his games, I'm like, come on. Like when he's younger, I totally get what you're saying.
But look, I will say this about myself. I'm like, I try to boil down. I text my husband feverishly yesterday he wasn't able to be at the games because he was working. So I'm texting him play by play. And I'm like, this is turning into a very negative, text thread. And I don't want it to be that. But I don't externalize that for the most part.
Stays on the phone.
For the most part, yes. I'm like, after the game, I've got like one note, that I wait a little while to say rather than 30, I'm like, here's the one takeaway that I think is the most important note. And we'll wait a little while and then we'll squeeze that in. And then but for the most part, it's like, boy, that was fun.
This is awesome.
But I get stressed.
Yeah, seriously. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on Mondays with Madison. It was so great to catch up with you and get to really pick your brain about your career and hear all about your past experiences. I will link all of her social media and her podcast down below in the description, so make sure you guys go check that out. But with that being said, I will see you all next video. See you later, sports fans.
Yay, Maddie!
I know, it's kind of weird. It's like I've watched you and now you're watching me, so it's like,
No, I'm in the stands at the Coliseum while you're down in the end zone.